the setup a roommate from the stars. In the bustling dormitories of my college, I was just another student trying to balance classes, social life, and the occasional late-night pizza binge. Everything changed when I found myself matched with a roommate from the stars, Roonak, an alien exchange student from the distant planet Orive. On move-in day, I was struck by the bizarre nature of my new living situation. Roonak looked like a cross between a squid and a frog with vibrant green, translucent skin that shimmered in the light. His large, intelligent eyes seemed to observe everything with a mixture of curiosity and wonder. As we settled into our shared space, Roonak's otherness quickly became apparent. He approached everyday activities with an alien perspective. For instance, while I groaned at the sight of dirty laundry, he marveled at the concept of clothing. He was fascinated by how humans used fabric to cover their bodies, asking questions that would make anyone blush. Why do you cover your skin? Is it a protective mechanism? He inquired one evening, his head tilting in that peculiar way aliens do. I laughed it off, realizing that my mundane life was an endless source of amusement for him. What started as a typical roommate situation soon transformed into an extraordinary cultural exchange. Roonak was eager to learn about Earth, and I found myself becoming an unintentional ambassador for humanity. He asked me about everything from our food and music to our strange rituals and customs. I enjoyed sharing stories and explaining the nuances of human behavior, but there was one topic that made me squirm: reproduction. One evening, while we were eating pizza which Roonak had approached with trepidation, unsure of its purpose, he leaned closer. "Theo," he said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity, "I have been studying your earthly customs, and I have encountered a curious term, breeding. What is this breeding you speak of?" I nearly choked on my slice. Well, it's how humans ... have children." My cheeks flushed as I realized how awkward this conversation was going to be. Roonak tilted his head further, clearly not satisfied with my vague answer. "You say have children, but are children not just smaller versions of your species? Why do they not simply grow on trees?" His innocent questions made me laugh, but I also felt a pang of discomfort. "No, Roonak, humans don't grow on trees. We mate, and then the mother carries a baby until it's ready to be born." Roonak seemed disappointed by this explanation. "So there are no spores? No seed pods?" I shook my head, trying to mask my embarrassment. As the days passed, Roonak's curiosity only intensified. He began to pepper our conversations with inquiries about the intricacies of human relationships and the biological processes involved in reproduction. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he absorbed every word. His fascination led to increasingly awkward interactions as he sought out more information. He would approach me with random articles he'd found online, waving his long, webbed fingers excitedly as he quoted strange terminology like pheromones and mating rituals. At times, I found myself desperately trying to steer the conversation away from the subject. However, Roonak was relentless, driven by a deep-seated desire to understand the human experience, which made it difficult to simply brush him off. Despite my attempts to avoid the subject, I soon realized that I couldn't escape Roonak's insatiable curiosity. He had a way of framing even the most embarrassing questions in a manner that made it hard for me to say no. "Would you be willing to explain the mating process in detail?" he asked one evening as we lounged in the common room, the glow of his skin casting an eerie light on our surroundings. I sighed, knowing I was in over my head. "Look, Roonak, it's complicated," I admitted, hoping that my reluctance would satisfy his curiosity without having to delve into personal details. "Complicated, or simply misunderstood," he countered, his eyes gleaming with intrigue. And that's how I found myself in an escalating series of discussions about human reproduction, each one more embarrassing than the last. I tried to stick to the basics, but Roonak was not one to shy away from the specifics. He would ask about everything from emotional connections to the biological mechanisms behind human reproduction, and I found myself struggling to provide adequate explanations. As we navigated this unique dynamic, I began to wonder how far Roonak would go in his quest for knowledge. Would he ever understand the complexities of human relationships? Or was I destined to become the unwitting subject of his intergalactic research project? Little did I know, Roonak was about to take his understanding of human reproduction to a whole new level. Roonak's obsession with breeding. As weeks turned into months, Roonak's fascination with human reproduction grew exponentially. It became an all-consuming passion, blending scientific inquiry with a genuine curiosity that was both endearing and slightly alarming. His quest for knowledge reached new heights as he immersed himself in every resource he could find. I would often find him hunched over my laptop late at night, the glow of the screen illuminating his squid-like features. He'd scour through academic articles, online forums, and even social media platforms, seeking out every piece of information related to human biology and reproductive practices. Theo, he would call out, excitement bubbling in his voice. I have found a new term: courtship. Is this akin to the mating dances of my people? Kind of, I'd reply, stifling a laugh. But it's a bit more complex than that. What do you mean, he pressed, completely unbothered by my discomfort. So, I would stumble through explanations about the nuances of human attraction, social interactions, and the awkwardness of dating. It felt like I was teaching an advanced course on human emotions, and I often left the discussions feeling like I was the one being examined. Despite my efforts to clarify, Roonak seemed determined to grasp every facet of human interaction. He began to ask me about specific rituals surrounding dating and mating, things like flirting, the significance of holding hands, and what it meant when someone gave flowers. What do these petals represent? Is this part of your complex mating rituals, he queried, eyes wide with genuine intrigue. Flowers are a way of showing affection, I explained, hoping to keep it simple, but it's not a requirement. Some people don't do it at all. Roonak furrowed his brow in confusion. So it is optional. How does one know when to use flowers? As if trying to create a foolproof checklist, Roonak took to documenting everything. He kept a notepad where he jotted down notes on what I explained. Terms like body language, eye contact, and dating etiquette became frequent entries. It became an ongoing comedy of errors. I could practically see the light bulb moment when something clicked for him, followed by an absurd misunderstanding. In a particularly memorable conversation, he asked about the role of pheromones in attraction. Do you produce a specific scent to attract potential mates, he asked, his voice filled with genuine wonder. Yes, but it's not like how you might think, I replied, trying to convey that our attraction involved much more than biology. It's subtle, and people usually don't realize it's happening. Roonak's eyes sparkled. Then, to gather data, I should experiment with these pheromones. Wait, what? No, you can't just. Before I could finish my sentence, Roonak was already brainstorming ways to gather this elusive data. He would spend hours attempting to design what he called the human pheromone observation device. I couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer absurdity of the notion an alien trying to distill human attraction into a series of experiments and scientific observations. His obsession took a turn when he suggested we conduct a courtship experiment. We should observe human pairs interacting in their natural habitat, he insisted one day. We can learn more if we study their behaviors in the wild, as it were. What do you mean by in the wild, I asked, both intrigued and apprehensive. I suggest we visit social gatherings, parties, dance events, and cafes. I need to see these mating rituals in action. His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite my initial reservations, I found myself swept up in his eagerness. Our first outing was to a party at a friend's apartment. Roonak arrived in a colorful outfit. He had designed an eccentric blend of human fashion and Arabian flair. As soon as we stepped into the room, Roonak's eyes widened at the sight of humans mingling. It was a chaotic scene filled with laughter, chatter, and the unmistakable energy of young adults trying to connect. Look at them. They are emitting a fascinating array of vibrations, Roonak exclaimed, gesturing wildly. Is this the pheromonal exchange you mentioned? I had to stifle my laughter. Sort of, but it's also about conversation, eye contact, and physical proximity. He nodded vigorously, documenting every interaction he saw, trying to identify patterns in behavior. He pointed out couples engaged in deep conversations, laughing together, and even those who stood awkwardly in corners. "This is the flirting you spoke of," he asked, motioning toward a pair who were gazing into each other's eyes. "Yeah, but you might want to tone it down a little," I advised, noticing that Roonak's gaze was so intense it could easily make anyone uncomfortable. "Tone it down," he echoed, clearly puzzled. The night was filled with humorous observations as Roonak attempted to interpret human social cues through his alien lens. I watched in awe as he navigated the chaos of the party, completely unfiltered in his fascination. At one point, he even approached a group of girls, introducing himself with an overly formal greeting that left everyone bewildered. "Greetings, Earthlings. I am Roonak, here to observe your mating rituals," he proclaimed, beaming with pride. The girls stared at him, unsure if he was serious. Cool," one of them replied, trying to keep a straight face. "Do you emit pheromones?" I must know, Roonak pressed, his enthusiasm unwavering. While the girls exchanged confused glances, I felt a mix of embarrassment and amusement. I couldn't help but admire Roonak's commitment to his mission, even if it was painfully awkward for everyone involved. As the night progressed, Roonak continued to gather data, asking random people about their dating experiences, rituals, and perceptions of attraction. Each interaction brought him closer to understanding the complexities of human relationships, but it also left a trail of bewildered partygoers in his wake. His boundless curiosity often blurred the lines between cultural exploration and sheer chaos. I knew it was only a matter of time before he pushed the boundaries of human norms even further, but I was also becoming more invested in helping him navigate this peculiar adventure into human breeding. The more Roonak learned, the more questions he had, and I had a feeling we were just scratching the surface of his fascination. The breeding observation simulation engine. One fateful evening, after a particularly chaotic weekend of social observations, Roonak excitedly announced that he had devised a solution to his ongoing confusion about human reproduction. As I entered our apartment, I was met with the sight of an enormous contraption occupying the living room, a bizarre amalgamation of blinking lights, whirring mechanisms, and a vast array of tubes and beakers. "What in the world is that?" I asked, eyes wide in disbelief. "This," Roonak declared proudly, gesturing dramatically toward the machine, "is my breeding observation simulation engine. With it, I will unravel the mysteries of human reproduction once and for all." I stared at him, unable to suppress a mix of admiration and apprehension. "A simulation engine? You mean to replicate the process of breeding?" "Yes. I have conducted extensive research, and now I will be able to create a visual representation of human mating through this device." His enthusiasm was palpable, but I couldn't help but feel a twinge of dread at what that might entail. Before I could voice my concerns, Roonak began to explain how the machine worked. It uses a combination of data collected from your biological studies and the interactions we observed at the party. I have coded it to simulate human emotions, physical interactions, and even pheromone exchanges. "Wait, you've coded it?" I asked, slightly incredulous. "Indeed. I integrated complex algorithms based on human relationship dynamics. Now, we will witness the fascinating process of human breeding in real time," Roonak replied, completely oblivious to my reservations. With a flick of a switch, the machine whirred to life. The display screen lit up, showing what appeared to be a digital representation of two human figures standing on opposite sides of a colorful landscape, perhaps meant to mimic a park or garden. "This is the starting point," Roonak explained. "Here, they will engage in their mating rituals." As the figures began to move, I watched in a mixture of horror and disbelief. They awkwardly sidled up to each other, performing exaggerated gestures that bore no resemblance to anything I recognized as flirting or attraction. "Is this what it looks like when two humans meet?" Roonak asked, fascinated. "No, not at all. It's not like a dance-off," I protested, but Roonak was already engrossed in the simulation. "This is merely a test run," he announced. "Now, I will introduce a bonding phase into their interaction." With a few more taps on the control panel, he pressed another button. The figures were now depicted leaning toward one another, their arms outstretched in a clumsy attempt at touching. I cringed at how robotic their movements seemed, completely devoid of the subtleties of human connection. It seems that the bonding phase is not as effective as I anticipated, Roonak mused, tapping the screen. What could they be missing? Maybe they need to talk to each other first, I suggested, trying to help him understand that the emotional groundwork was critical before any physical interaction. Ah, conversation, Roonak exclaimed, brightening up. I will incorporate dialogue into the simulation, he typed furiously on his keyboard, creating lines of dialogue that were stilted and awkward at best. The figures began exchanging over-the-top compliments and phrases like, "Your epidermis is remarkably smooth," which only made me wince. Despite its glaring absurdity, I had to admit there was a kind of charm in Roonak's earnest attempt to grasp something so deeply human. He was genuinely trying to create an understanding that went beyond biology, even if the execution was more comedic than educational. As the simulation continued, I found myself caught between laughter and horror. Roonak's figures began to mimic a variety of human social behaviors, but they did so in the most exaggerated and comical ways. They bumped into each other, fell over, and tried to pick each other up with exaggerated gestures that looked more like a slapstick routine than a genuine interaction. Now, I shall simulate the pheromonal attraction, Roonak declared, clearly in his element. He adjusted knobs and pressed buttons with gleeful enthusiasm. Suddenly, the figures were enveloped in a haze of colorful mist, meant to represent the elusive pheromones. Look, they are reacting, Roonak said excitedly as the figures leaned closer, their arms reaching out awkwardly. Yet, instead of an elegant interaction, they began to spin around each other in dizzying circles, as if caught in a whirlwind of confusion. Is this how humans express attraction? Roonak asked, bewildered. Definitely not, I replied, stifling a laugh. It's not usually like a game of dizzying tag. Determined to refine the simulation, Roonak continued tweaking the machine, pressing buttons and making adjustments. The figures started to exhibit signs of what I thought might resemble attraction, but it quickly devolved into a series of ridiculous poses and overblown gestures. At one point, the figures collided and fell, landing in a heap. This is a bonding exercise, Roonak announced, seemingly unperturbed by the visual chaos. I was in stitches, shaking my head at the hilarity of it all. Roonak, I think you need to reconsider your approach to bonding. Humans don't usually fall over each other while trying to connect. He paused, deep in thought. So, no falling, he asked, genuinely trying to understand. Not usually, I replied, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. More like emotional connection, Roonak finished for me, clearly intrigued by the idea. Then I must incorporate emotional depth into the simulation. With renewed focus, he began reprogramming the machine, aiming to capture the emotional nuances of human attraction. I watched in awe as Roonak strived to create a more authentic simulation, hopeful that he might finally capture the complexity of human relationships. Little did I know, as we continued to refine the simulation, Roonak's ultimate goal was far more ambitious than I had anticipated, and the depths of his curiosity were only beginning to unfold. The grand presentation and the epilogue. After countless late-night sessions refining the breeding observation simulation engine, Roonak was finally ready to unveil his masterpiece. The day of the Galactic Cultural Council's presentation loomed large, and I could sense his excitement and my mounting anxiety. Roonak had made it clear that he intended to demonstrate his findings about human breeding and bonding rituals to an audience of esteemed alien dignitaries, and I was expected to play a key role in this ambitious undertaking. As the date approached, the atmosphere in our apartment became a whirlwind of preparation. Roonak insisted on perfecting every detail. We must ensure that the simulation is flawless, he would declare, his vibrant skin glowing with determination. I had become more of a sounding board than a participant, frequently subjected to Roonak's grand theories about human relationships. Do you think I should include examples of romantic poetry, he asked one night, typing furiously on his laptop. It seems humans often express emotions through artistic means. I could program a segment where the figures exchange poems. That could work, but you might want to keep it simple, I advised. knowing full well that most poetry was a far cry from the literal, data-driven interpretations Roonak favored. Simple, yes, but it must also evoke emotion, he replied, as he coded a new segment into the simulation, incorporating lines of classic love poetry with all the grace of a malfunctioning robot. As the day of the presentation finally arrived, I found myself swept up in a flurry of activity. Roonak had insisted that I join him in his presentation, claiming that my expertise in human emotions would enhance the demonstration. I could feel the butterflies in my stomach as we made our way to the assembly hall, which was buzzing with alien attendees from various planets, all curious about Earth and its customs. The venue was unlike anything I had ever seen, adorned with luminescent structures and bustling with life forms of every conceivable shape and color. I marveled at the alien dignitaries who gathered, each one more bizarre than the last. Some floated, others slithered, and a few appeared to be composed entirely of shifting, iridescent light. Roonak stood at the front of the hall, proudly presenting our setup, the breeding observation simulation engine looming large behind him. Esteemed members of the Galactic Cultural Council, he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. Today I shall present the results of my extensive research into the mating rituals of Earth's inhabitants, humans. He gestured towards the machine, and a collective murmur rippled through the audience. I felt a pang of anxiety wash over me. What would these aliens think of Roonak's wild interpretations? Would they appreciate the absurdity or view it as an affront to their intelligence? With a flourish, Roonak activated the simulation. The room filled with vibrant colors as the digital figures sprang to life, mimicking the ridiculous scenes we had worked on for weeks. They spun and collided, exchanged clumsy dialogues, and engaged in bizarre bonding exercises that made it seem as if they were attempting a choreography designed by a confused octopus. The audience was initially silent, their various eyes and appendages fixated on the display. I watched, half horrified and half amused, as Roonak narrated the unfolding drama. Observe the figures as they engage in traditional courtship. Note the significance of their awkward body language and the way they express interest through exaggerated movements. A few of the dignitaries exchanged glances, a mix of amusement and bewilderment evident on their faces. One particularly rotund alien with a plethora of tentacles seemed to be stifling a laugh. I felt a wave of heat wash over my cheeks. This was not how I envisioned the presentation going. Now, Roonak continued, completely unfazed. I will introduce the element of pheromonal attraction with another tap. The figures became enveloped in a colorful mist, once again spinning in dizzying circles. Laughter erupted from a corner of the room as the audience members struggled to contain themselves. I was torn between embarrassment and a sudden urge to join in the laughter. Roonak, however, remained serious, determined to deliver his message. Here we see the failure of communication, he declared, pointing at the spinning figures. When humans misinterpret their attraction, they often find themselves in chaotic scenarios, much like what you observe. The laughter grew louder, and Roonak seemed to take it as a sign of engagement rather than ridicule. Now I will demonstrate the introduction of emotional depth. With renewed focus, he switched to a segment that showcased the figures exchanging heartfelt, if somewhat absurd, lines of poetry. Roses are red, violets are blue, your epidermis is remarkably smooth, the figures recited, prompting a wave of giggles throughout the audience. But amidst the laughter, Roonak managed to make a poignant point about the importance of emotional expression in human bonding. He began to explain how relationships required more than mere biological interaction. They involved understanding, vulnerability, and emotional connection. The laughter subsided slightly as attendees began to nod, intrigued by the depth beneath the chaos. As the presentation unfolded, I felt myself easing into the experience. Roonak's sincerity and passion shone through, and I began to see the humor in the absurdity. Perhaps this wasn't just a ridiculous interpretation of human relationships, it was a unique lens through which others could appreciate our complexities. The presentation culminated in a QA session, where members of the council raised their tentacles and appendages to ask questions. To my surprise, many were genuinely interested in Roonak's findings, eager to delve deeper into the nuances of human bonding. What is the significance of emotional expression in human reproduction? One alien queried, its voice resonating through the hall. Humans are complex beings. Emotional connections allow for deeper understanding and commitment, which can influence the success of breeding, Roonak explained, clearly in his element. As the questions continued, I watched Roonak handle each one with grace and humor, explaining the intricacies of human behavior as if he were discussing the weather. The audience, initially skeptical, began to engage more actively, and I felt a surge of pride for my alien roommate. Roonak's presentation transformed from a comedic display into a thought-provoking exploration of human connections, bridging the gap between species and cultures in a way that I had never anticipated. I realized that despite the unorthodox methods and the initial chaos, he had somehow captured the essence of what it meant to be human, flawed, hilarious, and undeniably complex. As the session came to a close, the council members exchanged excited murmurs and gestures, clearly intrigued by the exploration of human relationships. Roonak stood tall, basking in the glow of success as the room erupted in applause. In that moment, I recognized that our journey together had been about more than just science. It had been an exploration of the very nature of connection itself, transcending the barriers of language and culture. The applause rang in my ears as I turned to Roonak, feeling a deep appreciation for the adventure we had embarked on together. Our unusual partnership had grown beyond simple curiosity. It had become a shared quest for understanding, bridging two worlds in the most unexpected ways. Yet, as the crowd began to disperse, I knew this was only the beginning of our adventures together. Roonak's thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and who knew where it might lead us next? Here's an expanded version of Point 4, the ultimate sacrifice of battle that redefines alliances. In the heart of the final conflict, Torres and Kirak found themselves facing the Urukan horde in a brutal, desperate fight. The battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, choked with the smoke and chaos of war, a landscape turned unrecognizable from the constant blasts and shrapnel tearing through the air. The Urukan, monstrous beings with reptilian features and brutal tactics, fought with a bloodlust that had already decimated countless soldiers. They pressed forward, relentless, their numbers seeming to double with every wave, overwhelming human and Andarian forces alike. Torres and Kirak, though exhausted from the strain of battle and the toll of their shared bond, stood resolute at the front lines. Their comrades had come to rely on them, inspired by their bravery and unwavering loyalty to each other. Word of their legendary prowess had spread, and their presence alone was enough to rally the troops, even in the face of the overwhelming enemy. Together, they formed a bulwark, fending off the Urukan hordes with an unbreakable strength, each of them knowing that without the other, they might not survive this onslaught. But even their strength had limits. The Urukan soon unleashed their most fearsome weapon, a hulking creature bred for destruction, larger and more vicious than anything Torres had ever seen. Covered in thick, armored scales and armed with massive, razor-sharp claws, it towered over the battlefield, roaring with a sound that shook the ground. With each swing of its claws, it tore through squads of soldiers, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Torres and Kirak could feel its rage reverberating through the air, an animalistic fury that threatened to crush the resistance once and for all. Kirak, sensing the desperation of the moment, pushed forward with a ferocity that even Torres had never seen. Through their bond, she felt his resolve, a silent promise that he would protect her, even if it cost him his life. But as the beast advanced, slashing and thrashing its way towards them, it became clear that even Kirak's strength might not be enough. They fought in perfect harmony, each anticipating the other's moves, but every blow they dealt seemed to barely faze the creature. It was as if the Urukan had created this monstrosity to counter their every strength, a final, brutal challenge to break their spirits. The battle escalated into a fight that drew the attention of every soldier on the field. Human and Andarian forces watched in awe and horror as Torres and Kirak went head-to-head with the beast. At one point, the creature struck Kirak with a crushing blow, sending him sprawling. Torres felt the impact, as if it had struck her own body, a searing pain that blurred her vision and nearly forced her to her knees. But she forced herself to press on, her mind reaching out to him, sharing her strength in a desperate attempt to keep him fighting. She saw through his eyes, felt the tremors of exhaustion in his body, and, in that moment, understood just how much he was sacrificing to protect her. Despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to back down. Torres used every ounce of her tactical ingenuity, finding weak spots in the creature's armored hide, directing Kirok to strike with precision rather than brute force. She aimed her own attacks to create distractions, openings that allowed Kirok to land critical blows, and yet, each successful strike was met with a retaliation that grew fiercer, a reminder of the Urukon's resolve to break them. Then, in a brutal twist, the creature managed to pin Kirok beneath its weight, crushing him against the earth with a sickening crack. Torres felt his pain rip through her, a sharp, consuming agony that left her momentarily paralyzed. But she knew she couldn't falter now. Desperation coursing through her, she gathered every ounce of strength she had and launched herself onto the creature's back, determined to give Kirok a chance to escape. She fired shot after shot, aiming for its exposed neck, hoping to weaken it enough to release her partner. The creature roared, thrashing wildly, but her assault had bought them a precious moment. With her heart pounding and her strength nearly spent, Torres reached out through their bond, channeling her life force into Kirok in a final, reckless attempt to save him. She didn't fully understand what she was doing, only that she was willing to give everything to keep him alive. Their bond deepened, becoming almost blinding in its intensity as her energy flowed into him, reigniting his will to fight. She could feel his gratitude, his shock at her willingness to sacrifice so much, and a fierce determination that matched her own. In that instant, their connection reached a level beyond anything they had ever experienced. Two beings merged in purpose, united by a trust that transcended species and culture. Fueled by her strength and his own rekindled resolve, Kirok managed to break free from the creature's grasp. With a roar that matched the beast's own, he rose to his feet, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Together, they launched a final assault, each strike a coordinated symphony of strength and strategy. Torres used every ounce of her remaining energy to guide him, her voice in his mind urging him on, directing him with the precision they had honed through countless battles. With one last, powerful blow, Kirok brought the creature down, its massive form collapsing with a shuddering thud that echoed across the battlefield. Their victory was hard-won, leaving them both exhausted and forever changed.